Hello and most welcome to 1117 of the series. And we were just discussing rationality and mythos. I think that could be a good way to start. And we just heard an interview where Shia LaBeouf tells that he's become a Catholic after playing the role as Padre Pio in an upcoming smash movie, I can imagine it's going to become. The director is not bad, so we'll see what happens. What he mentions in the interview is that if you put something clear, it becomes obscure or unclear, not as telling. And when I heard that, I was thinking the different way of reality that is shown from quantum mechanics shows that exactly. If we focus on one detail, for instance the particle side, that has been the case for the last 2,000–3,000 years, we lose out on the wholeness. And this also applies for logos mythos. Once upon a time, and that happened already in Presocratic time, they became divided into mythos in one part and logos in one part. They used to be one singular thing, and by dividing them they both become less. And especially if we want to sort of define logic or logos or ratio, whatever it's called, from what it's not, and thereby we half it once more, it becomes less. And what is rationality today if not defined but on basis on what it is not? So there is an underlying gestalt that causes this to speak, and that underlying gestalt is that by excluding many things we can reach clarity, distinction, exactness. But since the foundation, I would say, is different, we don't reach those goals. And I'm going to sketch another variety, completely different, and that is reality as a net, like this one, interwoven feature, because reality today, as we know it from physicos, is interwoven. And if we take a weave, I take this cloth as an example, and if this is the totality of everything, this cloth can point to different things if we sharpen it, and instead of dividing it by cutting it into two and thereby making it less efficient, we are using the whole cloth to point with. And I would say that once more is the point of the voice of the friend, trying to show exclusion makes everything much weaker. It makes things imprecise, indistinct, blurry. But if you take the whole, if the world is a net, which it is, then you can reach both distinctness and you can also reach generality, the whole thing. So the whole thing and the specific thing are not contradictory, so you have to choose either or. And this is very similar to the idea that normally we think we have to choose plurality or singularity. What we should do with the idea how the world is really constructed, every aspect of the world, especially on mental side, more often said that the classical physics affects more how we think than what the physicos is. And I think he has a point there, because if we use the weave as an example, we realize you can't take time away from space. Actually, you can't even take the different aspects of space from space itself. And I really like the picture that is emerging slowly from the writing of Jude Currivan, whose surname I will never forget. It is stuck there, Then we have the totality. It is interwoven. It is a net. And there is actually some philosophy that supports that. And it has a name. It's called the net of Indra. The net of Indra. Imagine a shimmering net of light without beginning or end. Think of the net as endless. At each node, these are called nodes, each node of its weave and weft sits a shimmering jewel, for instance here. And these myriad, multifaceted jewels reflect and are each reflected by every other in rainbow-hued radiance of ever-changing illumination. Its infinite oneness manifests in the uncountable creative gems through which its eternal evolution is continually inspired and co-created. So both the creator and the created is in the same weave. Some 3,000 years ago or more, this ancient numinous image of the cosmos was first expressed in the sacred Indian text of the Atharvaveda, or often shortened to the word Veda or the Veda, and often seen as a net of Indra. It was the means by which the Vedic deity Indra, god of the heavens, created the appearance of the whole world. Now its revelation of integral reality and self-reflection at all scales of existence is being rediscovered and restated in a less poetic but equally majestic and scientifically based language. While this 21st century revolution is being led by cutting-edge science, its empowering implications will profoundly affect us all, for it is about to transform not only what we thought we knew about the physical universe, but also our perception of ourselves and the nature of reality itself. I've been seeking to understand what reality really is since childhood, and I felt impelled to be on a lifelong journey to ask not only how, but also why the cosmos is as it is. My scientific pursuit of answers began when I was about 5 years old, when I got a Christmas gift called The Voice, Book of Space by British astronomer Patrick Moore. I think that's interesting because that was one of my first books as well. Information. And this is another way of looking what informing information is. Information. It's in the format. And in the Indra's net, or the weave of time and space, knowledge or information is not separated from what it informs. And this is very similar to the fire in Heraclitus. In Heraclitus, fire is not a separable sign for something else like energy or wholeness or everything. It is of the same substance. It is also of the weave, because it's interwoven. And by trying to separate it like Saussure, you make it something incredibly less. You attenuate it, you make it less clear, you make it impossible to understand. It loses its power, because the power is the ability to make contradictions or distinctions like mythos and logos or wave and particle. It is the process of doing it that is important. And I often think about that when I think about logic. In logic, classical logic, often both teachers, professors and students perceive that logic is the language of thinking. But I realized somewhere, especially after reading Graham Priest, it's a very good name here into understanding the wholeness, Graham Priest, that it all starts before, and in this beforeness comes the power to express logic, but it needs to be free. If we start with logic, nothing new can come out. And maybe it was the words of one of my teachers, I don't remember her name, but she was interviewed by GP, the local newspaper here in Gothenburg, and they asked her, have you ever used logic? She said, I don't think so. She studied the whole subject 12 years, never used it. The reason is she is dealing with a product of Indra's net and trying to use that for thinking or logic. It's a sort of pre-logic where everything comes out of. It is like having her take on the whole thing is having a ready-made set. But here it is what it starts. Here is what the process is. And one product is logic. There can be other products, but one product is logic. So it's a temporal thing. It's a confusion of what comes first. Well, the before, it's where everything starts. And if you start with the after, you become incredibly limited. Then you have to make do with the rules that are already established, like classical logic or reasoning or the ideas of Sherlock Holmes and so forth. And although in some cases that could be good as well, you do not reach the source. And therefore you cannot be flexible, you can't change your logic, you're limited to a certain amount of arguments, and they are put together in a certain ways, and you think that there are loose rules governing this, but another person can say, my thinking is wider, more flexible, so my thinking allows more, and all of a sudden you lost your argument. And I think we all felt that situation. We put our arguments in a certain order and we think this is going to be waterproof. And I think that is a sign what being here could, this is the potentiality, this is where it starts. So if you reach into that, your possibilities are much more. And all the laws of logic are also coming there. So you, to a certain extent, if you are here, you can model them. They have to still be of the substance. They're still not lies. They're still not unreality. Actually, they're going to be much more effective than this rather tensed, pre-made logic, where the rules somewhere supposed to exist in a stratosphere outside of us. I can see how these things can be loosened up, so my reasoning, my daily reasoning, that might end me up in false thinking or thinking that doesn't lead to a good outcome. It becomes more limited if we are taking only one side of reality and think that everything is sort of boxed in from the beginning. In the end, that rule abiding is actually questioned by Gödel himself. The idea that there's a ready-made rule. I think there are rules, but they're not formalizable. If they were formalizable or something that you can speak of, they would be much weaker. So this is like the source everything is coming from, the elixir, the good stuff, the pre. And I think this is what Heraclitus is pointing to. It is the big pre, the source of everything. And then, of course, it can be expressed in contradictions. We always use contradictions, distinctions. But if you start with the distinctions, you lose out on all. So it's a matter of order as well. Out of sync, I often call that. Being out of sync can be one day in your life when you wake up too hastily, you have to rush somewhere, and maybe your thinking gets thwarted by somebody who screams at you at the street, and all of a sudden all your reasoning, your understanding, your possibility of taking in things gets incredibly limited. So the opener foundation is actually more promising, it's more rewarding, and this contains everything. It's how can you say, it's a big well. This is from where everything stems. We had an inkling of that many times ago when we spoke about the zero being the start of everything. Because it contains all positive integers, all positive natural numbers, and also all negative numbers and all negative integers, and so much more. So you can see it as a zero as well. It even can allow to be zero without diminishing itself. So the author Jude Currivan, writes the following information in the first chapter. What is conveyed or represented by a particular arrangement or a sequence of things. From bit, everything is information. This is what John Archibald Wheeler wrote, the maker of the famous Wheeler-DeWitt equation. And much later, David Deutsch made a sort of an analog to that. It from qubit. Qubit is the new bit that is coming soon. The qubit can be 0, it could be 1, and it could be the superposition of 1 and 0. Which of course makes for much more opportunities and varieties. The laws of motion and thermodynamics that define how matter and energy move and how they interact are basically laws of information. The concept of information, content, and flow is starting to be used powerfully to describe physical phenomena at a deeper and more all-encompassing levels than hitherto. The two 20th century pillars of science, the quantum theory and relativity theory, are also being re-evaluated as informational theories, a development that is being seen as having a potential to finally bring together these as yet unreconciled perspectives of our universe. And I think about this: up and down gives up. What does that mean? Well, it means it's all contained in the pre, but if we want to have a true up, we have to go back to the 0 And the exact same thing is in thermodynamics. We used to think thermodynamics can only move in one direction. And all of a sudden, with relativity theory, we discover that indeed thermodynamics can go in any old direction. And in quantum mechanics, it seems that it's derived from the Wheeler-de Witt equation. So it's no longer primary, but it's still very important. So where do you start when you start living, experiencing? Well, you should start at the right end in the net of possibilities and potentialities, because much more is stored there. Everything is stored there, and much more than we know about, much more than the known universe, because you have what we in the normal language call contradictions, distinctions, relations, order, ordinals, cardinals, and so forth. Everything is in here, and it seems somehow rules and what they apply for, the references, are all stored in the same fantastic place. Yes, it's incredibly hard to understand, and I think it's a process to go into the process thinking. But this is very helpful, and also is understanding how Heraclitus was misunderstood, because he wasn't really misunderstood. If we think that the product, what comes out of Indra's net, is the thing that which you use for thinking, before the understanding of the whole net has come, body and soul, we don't have much option. There is no option. And there are many reasons for that. First, the translator or the interpreter, his mind or her mind is set in that way, and they also need to communicate what they're writing to other people out in the community. And this alternative is new, did not exist before. It is not something you can reach onto. So in a similar fashion that quantum mechanics is buried and forgotten, so is Heraclitus. But one could say quantum mechanics wasn't forgotten in silence. People still start to speak about it, and thereby hiding it even more. The only way to hide quantum mechanics is to talk too much about it, or in ways that establish an order where everything is already constructed, where all the relations are already in place, and it's like a big clock, and you are putting in the last cog in the machinery, and then the whole machinery starts to move, and it makes the illusion of determinism, we not having a soul, we not having a free will, and somehow the world has always already been in place, and we don't have any choice. This is a promise that that is not the whole picture. It's the product of this. It's not wrong 100%, but it's derived. It's stemming from something that is bigger, that takes that as its child, but also other things as its child. So Heraclitus is pointing not in this way, clear, he's pointing with his whole hand, because that's the only way to point that onto something that is everything. How can you point to something that is everything by pointing with a finger? It's bound to be pointing to something specific. Pandainai, everything is one. And I think this is a process also. We can gain a lot of things. My mind has already starting to become a little bit more flexible. I wouldn't say a lot though, but I do feel a flexibility comes along, because when we get stuck somewhere in our thinking and tensed, it is usually the case that we can no longer go back to this more flexible, expanding way of thinking and being. And thereby we lose out both on universals and the particular the nominalist. We lose both the ability to wait and listen and let things be. We preemptively go out and capture them, kidnap them, and make them to something outspoken, explicit, told about, and thereby every truth becomes something much less. So he had some points, Shia LaBeouf. He preferred, it's an American actor, and he just mentioned how he prefers the Latin Mass. Although he doesn't understand the exact words, it speaks to him because he cannot put them into this little mold. That means that. The process of limiting understanding cannot take a start. So the openness is still there. And I would say a lot of spirituality is that very openness. If we fully understand it, or we hear it in a regular, ordinary language, there is always a risk, not a necessary risk, I would say, but there is a little risk, but rather big risk, that we fall into the same old thinking. And I would say the difference is not so much what you say, the content. The difference is much more where in this process are you presently? Are you going away from the net, or are you coming closer to the net? And everything that is defined here, whether it's, in this case, this American actor became religious, it could be anti, or you can become positive. Those two are still stuck here, way from the potentiality. You define yourself and thereby you become the soul into water. It dissolves. It no longer has the telling power which the before had, the source, the well, the energy, the prana, the true up. Jude continues here. Judy, we'll start by seeing how information is becoming viewed as being more fundamental than energy and matter, and indeed space and time. Along the way, we'll discover how the minutest Planck scale of our physical world, trillions of times smaller than the quantum realm, is the key to our developing insights regarding the primacy of information. And we'll appreciate that information really is physical, it's coming of the same substance, and begin our journey to understand how it literally informs our universe, while at the same time transforming our view of what we actually mean by the term physical. And this is something that is taken up in the book The Matter with Things by Ian McGilchrist. We usually say, says Ian McGilchrist, that everything is made of matter, and we seem to be very certain and sure what that matter is. But there is nothing more complicated than matter. We know very, very little about matter. And more true to the point is that when we say matter, we don't know what we're talking about. We assume it to be something that we can, that gives this sentiment or modus of being clear about something. It feels that we all share that. But if you go deeper into it, which is made in this book by Judy, and I would say also in Sein und Zeit and Philosophical Investigations, where you pursue some form of very careful investigation and really think about it, body and soul, you understand it's not that evident what physical is. And to say, well, like a couple Churchland or Chalmers, that it all stems from the material, it sounds very simple, but it is not simple at all. The wonders of the physical world is enormous. Of course, how could reductionism work if the material isn't that self-evident? If materialism is, the material in materialism isn't that direct, is not that simple. Well, it's a simplification process, and this is why I like this. You're further or down the scale, and this is being questioned by quantum mechanics itself. Why? Well, it says if you go into the direction that we've been doing for 2000 years and claim, you put your foot down and say everything is material, you block out the wave, and you also block out where it's coming from. So you lose out both on the wave and the particle. This is why the wave is so good, because it brings the particle back into action. And also the wave. So they both come to fruition or flowering at the same time. Maybe I should spontaneously read something from the book there, just to add a little spice. What do you think, Kelly?
Okay.
Let's see here. Here we have another book that sounds so promising. Heraclitus and Derrida, Presocratic Deconstruction. Chapter 4. Tomi dinon pote pos antis lafi or lafoi. Heraclitus, meaning through language and indifference. Maybe to be compared to Saussure or Levi-Strauss, I don't know. Heraclitus's critical examination yield many unconventional and provocative ideas. Clearly, his discourse encouraged a more thoughtful analysis of the relationships between different entities, especially those that are typically opposed more radically to each other, wave and particle. His philosophical perspective leads to a greater appreciation for the complex and complementary interdependence of all terms. The various arguments about structure, relationship, and the unity of opposites demonstrate the reasons for Heraclitus's particular account of the cosmos, the human psyche, and human ways of knowing. It is evident that for him, the fact and nature of change is what defines the identifying characteristics of any particular thing, whether element, quality, event, or concept. Despite the fact that the relatively small proportion of the extant fragments provide positive formal and general descriptions of the cosmic logos, these fragments have sustained massive scholarly commentary, and it's clear that such statements comprise the most notorious and compelling text of Heraclitus. Having analyzed his critical statements in chapters 2 and 3, our consideration of these positive claims will afford a more complete comprehension of his philosophical perspective regarding the logos of the cosmos and the human psyche, while his critique of the logocentric paradigm anticipates that of Jacques Derrida, to which it is quite similar in spirit, if not in the breadth and detail of articulation. His positive philosophical proposition prefigure the Derridian program of deconstruction and difference, and reveal a remarkable similarity in their discourses on language and meaning. According to Heraclitus, the cosmic logos is best understood as a process in perpetual movement, rather than a static essential substance. This movement, which functions as the supreme principle both for the physical universe and the human intellect, is also characterized in terms of a cosmic cognition. which is to say that for Heraclitus, the dynamic force of the cosmic logos systematically comprehends and structures the universe. He develops his claim from several arguments. The unity of the logos is conceived as fitting together or as having harmony by virtue of the constant tension of opposing forces. Harmony is that syllogism?
I don't get your question. I don't get your question. So harmony.
Syllogism.
How would you translate it? Syllogism is like putting it together arguments.
Oh, okay. Like in syllogism.
Yes.
That's sort of harmony. And the balance of this tension both produces and sustains the cosmic order as a functioning, unified whole. We find a further characterization of this tension in his description of a stable system of flux, in which the opposing forces coordinate in a constant, generally predictable process. Finally, the cosmic order is described as achieving its transformation through a dialectical process of apprehension and comprehension. In the discussion of extant fragments that follows, an analysis of the images of war, river, fire, and justice demonstrates Heraclitus's positive account of the cosmos, as well as his view that the systemic flux of the cosmic logos operates according to the same principles as the systemic flux of linguistic signification. Although Barnes, I don't know who Barnes is, has argued that Heraclitus' theory of the unity of opposites follows from his theory of flux, it is more consistent with Heraclitean principles that the theory of flux comes out of the empirical experience of patterns or relations between related entities as characterized in his history of the unity of opposites. We might argue, however, that the Heraclitean response to this question of primacy would subvert the very assumption that there is a first and a second. Very important. His position is likely to maintain that they are one and the same, insofar as neither exists without the other, and yet arguably the process of cognitive differentiation occurs before and enables the conception and ranking of a separate named entity. So this is a bit the same as here. It becomes an entity, but the entity is after. Observing the nature of the relationship between the separate entities and the larger arc of pattern. I like this, arc. The compromise produces the theory of flux. At any rate, insofar as Heraclitus offers a positive paradigm based upon his examinations, it can be found in the fragments which describe the unity of logos in terms of the tension between oppositions. Heraclitus purposefully resists settling on a master term, but illustrates this tension by offering multiple figures, the dynamics of war, the flux of the river, the metaphor of fire, and the prevailing force of Heraclitean justice. That's Dike, I think. Dike. Very interesting. There are some similarities between quantum mechanics and also what I'm only pointing at this stage, that Mandelbrot set and fractality, especially fractal boundaries or fractal horizons. It's in between what is created and what is still not created. One good thing here to think of is that the complete exactness that we encounter sometimes is coming from here. The absolute distinction that something is absolutely separatable also comes from here. So be careful not to make makeshift household compromise here and say we take a little bit of the whole, a little bit of the particular, and in between we find what we should strive for. No, it's actually not what he's saying. He's saying, in a way, a bit like the Southern school, the world is already a whole. So we need to be careful when we make the step towards coming back to the whole. So we, in that thinking, already claim that it's already been whole, it's already whole. What we gain is possibly quality, distinction, appreciation from others, being better at things. So it's that last thing came from Stephen M. Rosen and his little leaflet, Body of Paradox, and shows first the way that maybe I was thinking on before, the Northern School in China, where you try to shine off all ideas of like distinction like this and just have a whole. But the Southern school says in that prospect of trying to make what is taken apart whole, there is an implied idea that it has been taken apart at some instance. And by solving this with a method called the prajna, which includes the idea that everything is always already at a whole, no matter what it is, it's a whole. Even the Svenska kyrkan is a whole to some extent. It can be a hard pill to swallow, but it's true. Wholeness can never disappear from the world in some ways. Fractality is how the world actually works, and that is quantum mechanics as well. So it cannot completely disappear. Instead, this is Heraclitus' message. We can learn something, we can gain wisdom, knowledge. But it doesn't mean that we have, in every single debate, have to put our foot down and defend Heraclitus. It doesn't mean that we become Heraclitians. It is going from the inside and using the things that we already are. He doesn't ask us to change inclination. He's not a founder of a new philosophy in that matter, not like Bertrand Russell or Quine or Descartes, that we need to be his followers. What instead we can be shown is that what we already want, we can do much more by going into the source, and he's pointing to the source, and that you will become a better, I would say maybe even an analytical philosopher by understanding Heraclitus. It doesn't have to change anything in how you express yourself, how you think, but it could have that tendency. Because you go into bigger harmony, that could lead to transformation. And I think this is also the net of Indra. The Indra has always been there. The net is already present. So nothing is completely separable. And when I say this is separable, I might be using that term already with the understanding from my whole body that it is not completely separable. And if you meet somebody in the street and they point to that mug and say that mug is separable, those people to some level still understand it's inseparable, because that is where the word mug comes from. This is where the energy of talking comes from. Maybe if you find a catatonic person that cannot talk or are so lazy and given up, maybe you speak to somebody reading Sartre for 30 years and given up and sit by the cafe drinking all day. Maybe he can't express himself anymore. And that is a sure sign that he's come here. But otherwise, it's not that you can handpick. You're not Heraclitian. That is not the zest of it. I accuse you for not being Heraclitian. Doesn't really make sense. Heraclitian enters in what you already are and strengthens you and make you more yourself. And that idea came also into when I was thinking about some people like Richard Dawkins, my former professor, Tännsjö, how they get too much into they think if I'm going to have a theory, if I'm going to be hedonist that Tanquil is, I need to, all other thinking has to go out of the window. I cannot in my head keep things about religion or humanity or morality or even little bunnies. Those needs to be shoveled out. And this is not the case. He makes himself weaker, and that was actually evident in some cases. So even he would have had good use of Heraclitus. And then somebody say, is that moral? Then he would be even worse. I think it might change him in the long run. Maybe not in the instant. It could make him stronger, but I think by perceiving wholeness, there is a seed to change. And in that circumstance, Heraclitus has a message that has enormously positive potentialities, because it can change people who doesn't want to change from the inside by understanding how distinctions, contradictions actually stem from something greater. And if you access this more, your contradictions will be sharper, your voice would be sharper, and you can make contradiction even more contradictive. That is actually the point here. So therefore, his mission is healing in a way. And the wish that we need to nurture is, as you said, Kalle, that Roland Barthes said, pandare is a sort of wish, something to strive for, or the striving itself. And that will put us into pandainai, or more in the understanding of pandainai. So might be we're looking at the philosopher that should come up like this, and whose healing efforts can enter all strands of society, bar anyone. And there is also another tendency, the last one I will take up there, is like for simplification. Actually, these parables that is used in the text of Heraclitus, it's fire, war and peace, they are universal in some sense. And therefore so much easier to convey than might what comes out of quantum mechanics. And they do point to the same thing, the complementarity of contradictions. It would be much easier to say that war is needed to have peace, and both comes from something that is greater than both of them, the harmony. So yeah, it sounds really promising in Heraclitus. I wonder how much Ian McKilkus has gotten into this. I will check out Ian McKilkus this weekend, I promise, and get back to what his views is about Heraclitus. And must be time now to contact him as well. I say thank you very much. I really like Heraclitus, and I think he has potentials for the whole net of Indra. Thank you very much, and have a pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.